The chair was still warm. Ambassador Rilla pressed her four-fingered hand against the seat where her human counterpart always sat during their weekly trade meetings. The warmth meant he had been here recently, perhaps only minutes ago. But now the entire human embassy stood empty, and the silence felt like a scream. She walked through the abandoned offices on Station Meridian, her clawed feet clicking against floors that humans had installed themselves 3 decades ago. Coffee cups sat on desks, half-finished. Family photographs remained on walls. A child's drawing hung near one doorway, showing a stick figure human holding hands with what appeared to be a Fenari. Everything was left behind, everything except the humans themselves. Her communicator buzzed with increasing urgency. Messages flooded in from across the galaxy. The human colony on Dravis 7 had gone dark. The human medical station orbiting Fenari Prime had powered down and drifted into a parking orbit. Human cargo ships had abandoned their routes mid-journey, jumping to coordinates no one recognized. In 72 hours, every human in the known galaxy had simply vanished. Rilla found the message in the main conference room. A small holographic projector sat on the table, waiting to be activated. She pressed the button with trembling fingers. A human woman appeared, her face kind but tired. "To our friends and partners across the Galactic Council," she said. "Earth thanks you for your partnership. We have cherished our time among the stars with you. We wish you well in all your future endeavors. Goodbye." That was all, no explanation, no forwarding address, no promise to return. The emergency session of the Galactic Council drew representatives from all 47 member species. Rilla sat in her designated seat, watching the chaos unfold around her. Delegates shouted over each other. Accusations flew like weapons. Some demanded answers. Others demanded action. A few sat in stunned silence. High Counselor Morath of the Valeth Dominion called for order. His gray scales shimmered under the chamber lights as he raised his ceremonial staff. "Enough," he commanded. "We will address this matter with the dignity our positions require." "Dignity?" General Koss of the Dravani Collective laughed bitterly. "The humans have fled like cowards, and you speak of dignity." "Perhaps they grew tired of being surrounded by lesser species," suggested Ambassador Threll of the Zelathi Consortium. "Humans always did think highly of themselves." Rilla stood, drawing attention from across the chamber. "Has anyone considered simply asking them why they left?" Silence fell. Representatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We have attempted communication," Counselor Morath admitted. "Earth's solar system has been sealed. No transmissions are being accepted. No ships are permitted entry." "Then we wait," said Threll dismissively. "They will return when they realize how much they need access to our markets and resources." General Koss nodded his massive head. "I agree. The humans have always been dependent on galactic trade. They cannot sustain themselves in isolation. Give them a few months and they will come crawling back." Several delegates murmured agreement. Rilla noticed the relief spreading through the chamber like a disease. Relief that the humans were gone. Relief that their unsettling presence would no longer remind other species of their own limitations. She had heard the whispers over the years. Humans were too adaptable, too creative, too willing to do the jobs no one else would do. They made other species feel inadequate simply by existing, simply by helping without being asked, simply by caring about problems that weren't their own. The galaxy functioned for 10,000 years before humans arrived, Counselor Morath announced, his voice carrying the weight of false confidence. "We shall manage perfectly well without them. This session is concluded." As delegates filed out, Rilla noticed something peculiar. The Valeth representatives were not surprised. Neither were the Zelathi. They moved with the calm assurance of beings who had expected this outcome. She caught Counselor Morath's arm as he passed. "You knew," she said quietly. "You knew they were leaving." His ancient eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something that might have been regret. The humans were becoming too important, Ambassador. Every species was beginning to depend on them. Trade, medicine, peacekeeping technology. They were making themselves essential. And that frightened you? It should frighten everyone. He pulled his arm free. We are better off learning to stand on our own feet again. The humans understood that. They left for our benefit as much as their own. Rilla watched him walk away, her mind racing. Something about his explanation didn't fit. Humans didn't abandon people who needed them. It wasn't in their nature. She had worked alongside them for 15 years, and she had never met a species so desperate to be helpful. That night, alone in her quarters, she began reviewing classified council records, security footage, internal memos, voting transcripts that were never meant to be seen by lower ambassadors. What she found made her blood run cold. 3 months before the withdrawal, the council's inner circle had held a secret session. 12 senior members, no witnesses, no official record except for one leaked document that someone had failed to delete properly. The motion was simple. Request that Earth voluntarily reduce its presence in galactic affairs by 60% over the following decade. The vote was unanimous. Rilla sat back in her chair, staring at the names on the screen. The council hadn't just wished the humans would leave. They had asked them to go. They had told humanity in the politest possible terms that their help was no longer wanted. And the humans, being humans, had listened. They had packed their bags, said their goodbyes to no one, and disappeared into the void. The galaxy had gotten exactly what it asked for. Rilla wondered how long it would take everyone to realize what a terrible mistake that was. The distress signal had been repeating for 6 hours before anyone responded. A Fenari cargo hauler drifted powerless near the hollow nebula, its hull punctured by weapons fire that no one had expected. The captain, a veteran trader named Sorrel, had flown this route for 20 years without incident. The human patrol ships had always kept it safe. But the human patrol ships were gone now, and the Sketh marauders had noticed. By the time a council rescue vessel arrived, Sorrel and half his crew were dead. The survivors spoke of raiders appearing from nowhere, cutting through their defenses like paper, taking everything of value and vanishing into the nebula's interference. The old terror had returned to the trade lanes. 3 months had passed since the human withdrawal, and the galaxy was beginning to fray at the edges. Rilla stood before the council once again, presenting her findings to delegates who did not want to hear them. Piracy has increased 400% along major shipping routes, she reported. 16 colonies have reported food shortages due to disrupted supply chains. The Sketh marauders have claimed 3 systems that human naval forces previously kept secure. These are temporary adjustments, Counselor Morith insisted. We simply need time to redistribute our own forces. With respect, High Counselor, we have no forces to redistribute. Human ships handled 70% of anti-piracy operations. Our own navies are not equipped for this role. General Koss shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The Dravani Collective had been among the loudest voices celebrating the human departure. Now their border colonies were being raided daily, and their military was stretched impossibly thin. But the shipping lanes were only the beginning. On Voron Prime, the medical crisis had reached catastrophic levels. The Vorani were a fragile species, prone to a degenerative bone disease that required delicate surgical intervention. For 30 years, human doctors had performed these surgeries freely, asking nothing in return except the satisfaction of helping. No other species had the steady hands or the patience for the procedure. Now the hospitals were full of patients waiting for operations that would never come. Families gathered outside medical centers, holding photographs of loved ones whose bones were slowly turning to powder inside their bodies. The council's response was to establish a committee to study the problem. Meanwhile, on 17 agricultural worlds, the crops were failing. Human farming techniques had revolutionized food production across the galaxy. Their methods were efficient, sustainable, and adaptable to almost any environment. They had shared this knowledge freely, training local farmers, building irrigation systems, engineering plants to grow in hostile soil. But they had also been the ones maintaining the systems. And now, without their expertise, the machines were breaking down one by one. Rilla traveled to Fenari Prime to see the damage for herself. She walked through fields that had once produced enough grain to feed 3 systems. Now they stood brown and dead, the automated harvesters sitting idle because no one knew how to repair them. A farmer approached her, his fur matted with dust and despair. "The humans used to come every season," he said. "They would check the equipment, adjust the soil treatments, teach us new methods. We thought we understood what they were doing. We did not understand anything." "Can you not contact them?" Rilla asked. The farmer laughed bitterly. "Contact them? They are gone, and we are left with machines we cannot fix, growing crops we cannot save, feeding people we cannot protect." The worst discovery came when Rilla returned to Station Meridian and accessed the engineering reports. The station's reactor had been showing warning signs for weeks. Critical systems were beginning to fail. And every technician who examined the problem came to the same conclusion. The reactor had been designed by humans, built by humans, and could only be repaired by humans. Nobody else understood how it worked. The station that served as the seat of galactic government was slowly dying, and no one could stop it. Rilla requested an emergency meeting with Counselor Morith. She found him in his private chambers, staring out a window at the stars. He looked older than he had 3 months ago. The confidence in his scales had faded to a dull gray. "You knew this would happen," she said. "You knew we depended on them and you sent them away anyway." "We asked them to reduce their presence," Morith replied quietly. "We did not ask them to leave entirely." "What did you expect? You told them they were too helpful. You told them their kindness was a threat. What were they supposed to do?" Morith turned to face her. "They were supposed to understand. They were supposed to see that we needed to develop our own capabilities. They were supposed to help us grow independent, not abandon us entirely." Rilla felt rage building in her chest. "You insulted them, you made them feel unwanted, and now you blame them for leaving." "I blame them for being so fragile," Morith snapped. "They could have fought back, they could have argued their case, they could have refused to go. Instead, they simply accepted our decision and walked away." "Because that is what humans do," Rilla said softly. "They do not force themselves on people who do not want them. They help those who ask and leave those who refuse. You refused their help, Counselor. This is what refusal looks like." She left him standing alone in his chambers, watching the stars that humanity had helped them reach. That night, Rilla began drafting a proposal that no one on the council would want to hear. Someone needed to go to Earth. Someone needed to apologize. Someone needed to ask the humans to come back. But as she wrote, she wondered if asking would be enough. Some doors, once closed, could never be opened again. The riots started at dawn. Station Meridian had been rationing air for 2 weeks when the life support system finally collapsed in Sector 7. 3,000 beings lived in that sector. They had perhaps 4 hours of breathable atmosphere remaining when the emergency bulkheads sealed them in. Counselor Morith watched from the command center as crowds gathered outside the council chambers, demanding answers he could not provide. Security forces held the line, but their numbers were shrinking. Many had already abandoned their posts to secure passage off the station. The life support system had been installed by human engineers 40 years ago. It had never failed before. But humanity had designed it to be maintained by human hands, and there were no human hands left to maintain it. A Zelathi technician worked frantically at the control panels, trying to bypass the failing components. "I do not understand this design," she admitted, her voice cracking with frustration. "The humans built systems within systems. Everything connects to everything else. Fix one problem and 2 more appear." "Then find someone who does understand," Morith ordered. "There is no one, High Counselor. The humans took their knowledge with them." 8 months had passed since the withdrawal, and the galaxy was no longer fraying. It was tearing itself apart. The war between the Dravani and the Fenari had erupted without warning. Border disputes that humans had mediated for decades suddenly exploded into open conflict. Both sides had grown accustomed to having a neutral party settle their differences. Without that buffer, old hatreds resurfaced like infections in an untreated wound. Rilla had tried to intervene. She had traveled to the disputed territories, spoken with generals on both sides, pleaded for reason and restraint. They had listened politely and then continued killing each other. She was Fenari. She could not be trusted to be neutral. Only humans had ever managed that impossible balance. The plague had been the final blow. It started on a small colony in the Outer Rim, a respiratory infection that jumped species with terrifying ease. Human doctors had identified and contained this disease 30 years ago, developing treatments that kept it dormant in infected populations. They had monitored it constantly, adjusting their protocols as the virus evolved. Now the virus was evolving faster than anyone could track, and the doctors who understood it were drinking coffee on Earth, unreachable behind a wall of silence. 14 million beings died in the first wave. The second wave killed twice as many. And then the void lurkers returned. Rilla had thought them a myth, ancient predators from the dark spaces between stars, creatures that fed on starship fuel and left only wreckage behind. Human hunters had driven them to extinction in known space during the early years of galactic expansion. No one had seen a void lurker in over a century. But extinction, it turned out, was not the same as death. The creatures had simply retreated, waiting in the deep black for the hunters to leave. The hunters had left. She confronted Morith in the emergency bunker beneath the council chambers. The station shook around them as repair teams struggled to restore basic functions. The smell of smoke and fear filled the recycled air. "How many more must die before you admit the truth?" she demanded. "We cannot survive without them." Morith sat slumped in a chair, his scales pale and lifeless. "I know." "Then do something, send a message, beg them to return." "I have tried." His voice was barely a whisper. "Every channel, every frequency, every diplomatic protocol we possess. Earth does not respond. Our ships cannot enter their space. We are blocked at every approach." "Then we go in person. We send a delegation." "To say what?" Morith looked up at her with eyes that had seen too much death. "We told them to leave. We said their help was unwelcome. We voted in secret to reduce their influence. They gave us everything they had, and we threw it back in their faces." Rilla felt her anger draining away, replaced by something colder. "You never told the council about that vote. The others do not know." "The others did not want to know. They were happy to let us make the decision for them. It is easier to blame humans for abandoning us than to admit we pushed them away." "Then tell them, tell everyone. Let them understand what we did." Morith shook his head. "It would change nothing. The humans are gone, our crimes are our own. Confession will not bring them back." Rilla grabbed his arm, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You are wrong. Humans are strange creatures, counselor. They do not hold grudges the way we do. They forgive things that should be unforgivable. But they cannot forgive what they do not know. They cannot return to a galaxy that has never acknowledged hurting them." She released him and stepped back. "I am going to Earth. I am going to find whoever will listen, and I am going to tell them the truth, all of it, including the parts we are ashamed of. Then I am going to ask them to help us." "They will refuse." "Perhaps, but I would rather be refused honestly than die in silence." She turned toward the door. "Come with me or do not, but I am leaving tomorrow and I am taking whoever will follow." 12 delegations answered her call. Representatives from 12 species who had finally admitted what they had known from the beginning. The galaxy needed humans, not for their technology or their ships or their medicine, but for something far more important. Humans cared. In a universe full of species looking out for themselves, humans looked out for everyone else. And that simple, impossible fact had become the foundation upon which galactic civilization rested. The foundation had crumbled, and now they would try to rebuild it, one apology at a time. Earth filled the viewport like a blue-green jewel wrapped in white clouds. Rilla had seen images of the human homeworld before, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. It was smaller than Fenari Prime, more fragile somehow, yet it radiated a warmth that made her chest ache. She understood, looking at it, why humans fought so hard to protect things. They came from a world worth protecting. Her diplomatic vessel had been intercepted at the edge of the Sol system by a fleet of human warships. They had not fired. They had not threatened. They had simply surrounded her small ship and waited, their silence more intimidating than any weapon. For 3 days, Rilla transmitted her request for an audience. She explained who she was, why she had come, what she hoped to discuss. She apologized for the intrusion. She begged for understanding. On the 4th day, a single human ship approached and transmitted coordinates. Not Earth, not even Mars. A station orbiting the frozen giant Neptune, as far from the human homeworld as possible while still remaining within their system. The message was clear. You may speak with us, but you are not welcome here. The station was cold in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. Human architecture usually felt warm, inviting, designed for comfort rather than efficiency. This place felt like a fortress. Every surface was hard and smooth. Every corridor led to locked doors. Every human they passed looked at them with expressions that held neither hostility nor welcome. They were simply observed, like specimens under glass. The 12 delegations gathered in a conference room that could have held hundreds. They sat at one end of a long table, clustered together like children waiting to be punished. At the other end sat a single human. His name was David Parrish, and his eyes held the weight of a species that had been told it cared too much. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," Rilla began. "I agreed to listen," David corrected. "Meeting implies we have something to discuss. I am not yet certain that is true." General Koss leaned forward. The Dravani warrior had changed in recent months. His daughter had died from the plague that human doctors could have cured. His pride had died shortly after. "We have come to apologize," he said, "and to ask you to return." David's expression did not change. "You spent years telling us our help was unwanted. You held secret votes to reduce our presence. You celebrated when we left. Now you apologize." "We were fools," Koss admitted. "Yes, you were." David folded his hands on the table. "But foolishness can be corrected. What concerns me more is why you were fools. Why did our help threaten you so deeply?" The room fell silent. Rilla could feel the discomfort radiating from her fellow delegates. No one wanted to answer that question honestly. She stood, drawing David's attention. "Because you made us feel small," she said. "Every time you helped without being asked, every time you solved problems we could not solve, every time you gave without expecting anything in return, you reminded us of our own limitations. We could not match your generosity. We could not understand your kindness. So we told ourselves it must be a trick, a strategy for dominance. We told ourselves you were making us dependent so you could control us." David studied her face. "And what do you believe now?" "I believe we were wrong. I believe you helped because helping is what you do. I believe your kindness was genuine and we punished you for it. And I believe you left not because you were angry, but because you were hurt." For the first time, something shifted in David's expression. A crack in the wall, a glimpse of the pain beneath. "We gave everything we had," he said quietly. "Our knowledge, our resources, our lives. Human doctors died in alien hospitals. Human soldiers died defending worlds that were not their own. Human engineers worked themselves to exhaustion building systems for species who never thanked them." He paused, and Rilla saw moisture gathering in his eyes. "We did not ask for gratitude. We did not expect praise, but we thought at minimum that we were wanted. When we learned the truth, that you had voted in secret to push us away, it broke something inside us." "Then let us repair it," Rilla pleaded. "Let us prove that we have changed." David shook his head slowly. "How with words, with promises? Words are easy, promises cost nothing." "Then tell us what you need. Tell us what would prove our sincerity." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was harder. "We need to know that this will never happen again. We need to know that if we return, we will be treated as equals, not as servants to be discarded when we become inconvenient. We need a partnership, not a dependency. We need you to stand beside us, not behind us." "We can do that," Ka said. "Can you?" David looked at each delegate in turn. "Can you fight your own battles while we fight beside you? Can you make sacrifices for us the way we made sacrifices for you? Can you see us as partners rather than tools?" No one answered immediately. The question was too important for quick responses. Finally, Rilla spoke. "I do not know if we can, but I know we must try. The alternative is the death of everything we have built together." David Parrish stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the distant stars. "Prepare a new charter," he said. "A treaty of mutual support, not humans serving the galaxy, not the galaxy using humans, true partnership with obligations on both sides." He turned back to face them. "Bring me something worth signing and we will talk again." It was not forgiveness, it was not a promise, but it was a door slightly open. Rilla intended to walk through it. The negotiations lasted 17 days. Rilla had never worked so hard in her life. Every clause of the new charter was debated, revised, and debated again. Every word carried the weight of billions of lives. Every compromise felt like pulling teeth from unwilling mouths. The humans wanted guarantees. Real guarantees, not empty promises. They wanted seats on the Galactic Council with full voting rights. They wanted their contributions acknowledged in official records. They wanted the secret vote that had driven them away made public, so that every species in the galaxy would know what had been done. Some delegations balked at these demands. The Zelathi Consortium walked out on day 3, declaring that they would rather collapse than humble themselves before humans. The Vorani delegates nearly followed, stopped only by Rilla's desperate reminder that their people were dying from a disease only humans could cure. But slowly, painfully, the charter took shape. They called it the Compact of Mutual Need, not a treaty of protection where the strong defended the weak, not an alliance of convenience to be abandoned when circumstances changed. A compact binding all parties to support each other in times of crisis, to share knowledge freely, to stand together against common threats. David Parrish read the final draft in silence while the delegates held their breath. "This is acceptable," he said at last. "But before we proceed, there is something you need to understand." He activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air above the conference table. Ship positions, fleet movements, timestamps stretching back to the day the humans left. "We never stopped watching," David explained. "We withdrew, but we did not abandon you. We monitored every crisis, every conflict, every outbreak. We tracked the void lurkers when they emerged from hiding. We mapped their movements, predicted their targets, prepared countermeasures." General Koss stared at the display with growing horror. "You knew what was happening. You could have helped." "Yes." "Then why did you not?" David's face was hard as stone. "Because you asked us to leave. You told us our help was unwanted. We respected your decision, even as it killed you." The room erupted in angry voices. Delegates shouted accusations, demanded explanations, threatened to tear up the charter and walk away. David waited until the noise faded before continuing. "Understand something. Leaving was the hardest thing we have ever done. Every death weighed on us. Every crisis tested our resolve. We wanted to help. We needed to help. Helping is not just what we do. It is what we are. Watching you suffer while doing nothing nearly destroyed us." He paused, and Rilla saw the pain behind his professional mask. This was not a man who had enjoyed their suffering. This was a man who had suffered alongside them, invisible and helpless. "But we could not help people who did not want us," David continued. "We could not force our assistance on a galaxy that had rejected it. All we could do was wait and watch and hope that someday you would change your minds." The anger in the room shifted. It was still present, still hot, but now it was mixed with shame. The delegates had spent months blaming humans for abandoning them. They had not considered what that abandonment had cost humanity itself. Rilla stood and approached the holographic display. She studied the fleet positions, the careful preparations, the contingency plans that had never been activated. You were ready to return at any moment, she realized. You were waiting for us to ask. We were waiting for you to mean it, David corrected. Anyone can ask for help when they are desperate. We needed to know that you truly understood what you had lost. We needed to know that you would not simply use us until the crisis passed and then discard us again. How can we prove that? Before David could answer, an alarm shrieked through the station. Red lights flashed. A human officer burst through the door, his face pale with urgency. Sir, we have confirmation. The void lurkers have reached the inner colonies. Fenari Prime is under attack. Rilla felt her heart stop. Fenari Prime, her homeworld, her people, millions of civilians with no defense against the ancient predators. She turned to David, and for a moment she forgot about pride, about negotiations, about everything except the desperate need in her chest. Please, she whispered, please help us. David looked at her, and she saw the wall around his heart crack completely. Whatever test he had been conducting, whatever proof he had been waiting for, he found it in her eyes. We were never going to let you face them alone, he said softly. Then, louder to the officer at the door, signal the fleet, full deployment, all ships to Fenari Prime. Sir, the charter has not been signed. David picked up the document and pressed his thumb to the signature pad. It is now. The delegates rushed to follow, each adding their marks to the compact. There was no more debate, no more hesitation. The time for words had ended. The time for action had begun. The sky above Fenari Prime burned black. Void lurkers descended through the atmosphere in swarms, their bodies drinking light itself as they fell. They were nightmares given form, creatures that should not exist, relics of an age when the universe was younger and crueler. The planetary defense grid had failed within minutes. The military was overwhelmed. Citizens huddled in underground shelters, listening to the sounds of their world being devoured. Young Tara pressed herself against her mother in the darkness of their basement refuge. She was 7 years old, and she had never known real fear until tonight. The walls shook with distant explosions. Strange screams echoed through the streets above. Somewhere something was dying. "Mama," she whispered, "are the monsters going to eat us?" Her mother held her tighter but could not answer. There was nothing to say. The monsters were real, and no one was coming to save them. Then the sky exploded with light. Not the cold black of the lurkers, but brilliant white and gold, so bright it turned night into day. Tara covered her eyes as the shelter's walls groaned from the shockwave. When she finally looked again, her mother was crying. But they were not tears of fear, they were tears of relief. Through the shelter's small window, Tara saw shapes descending from the heavens. Ships, hundreds of them, painted in colors she did not recognize. They moved with impossible grace, weaving between the lurker swarms, their weapons turning the darkness into fire. The humans had returned. Across the planet, the same scene repeated. Human warships emerged from jump space directly into combat, their crews already at battle stations, their weapons already hot. They had been preparing for this moment for months, watching and waiting while the galaxy struggled alone. Now they fought with a ferocity that stunned their allies and terrified their enemies. Human marines dropped from orbit in armored pods, landing in the streets where Fenari defenders made their last stands. They formed lines alongside soldiers who had considered them enemies just a year ago. They shared ammunition, covered retreats, carried wounded to safety without asking species or allegiance. One human soldier, a woman with gray hair and scars on her face, found a group of Fenari children trapped in a collapsed building. She spent 4 hours digging them out with her bare hands, refusing relief, refusing rest until every child was free. When asked why she had risked her life for strangers, she looked confused by the question. "They needed help," she said simply. "What else was I supposed to do?" In orbit, the battle raged for 3 days. The void lurkers were ancient and terrible, but they had never faced opponents who refused to run. Human ships threw themselves into the swarms. drawing fire away from populated areas, creating openings for evacuations, sacrificing themselves to buy time for worlds they had never seen. By the end of the third day, the lurker swarms had broken. The survivors fled into deep space, wounded and diminished, driven back to the darkness from which they had emerged. They would not forget this defeat. The hunters had returned, and the hunters remembered how to hunt. 1 year later, Ambassador Rilla walked through a park in the capital city of Fenari Prime. The scars of the invasion were still visible, but green things were growing in the ruins. Children played in rebuilt playgrounds. Markets bustled with traders from a dozen worlds. Life continued as it always did. She found what she was looking for near a fountain that had been donated by the Human Relief Corps. A family sat on the grass, sharing a meal. The parents were human. The children were mixed, some human, some Fenari, adopted after the war from orphanages that could not care for them all. The mother looked up as Rilla approached and smiled with recognition. "Ambassador, please join us." Rilla settled onto the grass beside them, feeling the warmth of the sun on her fur. "I have been wanting to ask you something," she said. "Something I have wondered about since the day your people returned." "Ask." "Why did you come back? After everything we did, all the pain we caused, you could have let us fall. No one would have blamed you. Why did you choose to save us?" The mother was quiet for a moment, watching her children play. A human boy chased a Fenari girl across the grass, both of them laughing. Finally, she turned back to Rilla with eyes that held no anger, no resentment, only a simple certainty. "Because you needed us," she said. "That has always been enough." Rilla looked at the family, at the children from different worlds playing together as if they had always been siblings, at the father teaching his human son a Fenari game, at the mother watching over them all with the fierce protectiveness that seemed to define her species. She thought about everything the galaxy had learned that year. Pride was expensive, help was precious, and sometimes the greatest strength was not conquering others but caring for them. "We are grateful," Rilla said, "more grateful than we can ever express." The mother smiled. "Then show us, not with words but with actions. Stand beside us. Help others the way we helped you. Build a galaxy where kindness is not weakness, where compassion is not a threat. That is all we have ever wanted." Rilla nodded slowly. "That is a worthy goal. Then let us work toward it together." Somewhere across the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, humans and aliens were doing exactly that. Building hospitals, training doctors, sharing knowledge, protecting the weak. Not as masters and servants, not as helpers and helpless, but as partners walking the same road toward a future none of them could reach alone. The galaxy had learned something precious that year, written in blood and tears and sacrifice. Humans do not help because they want gratitude. They help because the silence of doing nothing is louder than any rejection. And now the galaxy was learning to listen.